me, everyone. In lieu of time, may I ask everyone to take their seats, please? So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished panelists, esteemed guests, and all protocol observed, welcome to our panel discussion on the role of the African Continental Free Trade Area in shaping the future of trade, investment, and sustainable development across the African continent. Today, we are joined by an esteemed panel of experts, including representatives from the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, from Nigeria, from the Democratic Republic of Congo, the AfCFTA Secretariat, and Senegal. These individuals will share their insights and perspectives on the transformative potential of the AfCFTA. The AfCFTA represents a monumental step towards deeper economic integration and cooperation among African nations. By creating a single market for goods and services, the AfCFTA aims to boost intra-African trade, attract foreign direct investment, and drive industrialization across the continent. Our panelists will discuss the challenges and opportunities presented by the AfCFTA in promoting cross-border investments, fostering regional value chains, and achieving sustainable and inclusive economic growth. Furthermore, our panel will explore the role of the AfCFTA in facilitating regional collaboration on climate resilience and sustainability, as well as the potential for the future agreement to support Africa's transition to a green, inclusive, and digital economy. We will delve into the efforts being made by individual countries and organizations to capitalize on the opportunities provided by the AfCFTA, as well as the strategies and initiatives in place to ensure that the benefits of the agreement are felt by all, including the most vulnerable and marginalized communities. Today, we have the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Honorable Antonio Pedro, Her Excellency Mariam Katagum, Minister of State for Industry, Trade and Investment from Nigeria, Mr. Anthony Kamole, Managing Director of the National Agency for the Promotion of Investments from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ms. Emily Mburu Ndoria, the Director, Trade and Services, Investments, IPR and Digital Trade from the AfCFTA Secretariat, Dr. Abdoulaye Baldé, the Director General of the APIX from Senegal, and to start the presentation, we have Dr. Stephen Karingi, the Director of Regional Integration and Trade for UNECA. He will start by giving a presentation on the investment paradigm shift for Africa. Before we begin, may I ask the panelists to take their seats, please? And Stephen, yes, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to set the scene for the panel. My name is Stephen Karingi, as you have heard, and let me see whether this one is working. It is working. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is to start by saying what is the potential of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So if you were to implement the African Continental Free Trade Area, it promises to increase the level of intra-African trade of value-added goods, of services, from where they are today. By 2045, that is because the AfCFTA has to be implemented over a number of years, we will be able to have an extra almost $200 billion of intra-African trade over and above what we are having today by the year 2045. Just to put it in context, today the intra-African trade is about $130 billion. Now, in terms of what is happening within the continent, if we implement the AfCFTA, all the protocols that have been negotiated, come 2045, we'll be having an extra almost $200 billion over and above that now. And that trade is going to be both in terms of areas like agri-food, pharmaceuticals, in the areas of transport, including in the area of energy. So that's what the AfCFTA promises to do. Of course, that comes with a lot of jobs, if you think about it, especially in the area of agri-foods. And it also comes with a lot of other services that you need to have. Now, for you to be able to do that, obviously you need investments. But we are here talking about the paradigm shift in terms of the investment regime within the continent. Now, when you talk to a lot of investors, you have had a lot of the perceptions that investors have. If you have attended some of the sessions where people are doing comparative analysis of the different regions, you hear a lot of them talk about different regulatory regimes, different investment policies in different African countries, in different African sub-regions. Now, the paradigm shift that we are presenting to you now, and I think you'll hear more about it now, is that now Africa has a common investment policy, which is one of the protocols under the AfCFTA. Now, I will not talk too much about this because the director responsible for this, that is from the AfCFTA Secretariat, is here. But you have a protocol that sort of harmonizes that if you come as an investor in the continent, you invest in one African country, you will be facing the same rules across the whole continent. So any barriers that are existing today in terms of investments within the continent, barriers that hinder intra-African investments, barriers that hinder FDI that want to take benefits from across the continent, the AfCFTA investment protocol is actually going to address this. So that's what the investment protocol is about. And in fact, the argument here is that with this investment protocol, you're already having a paradigm shift in what pertains today in the continent. And it is through this kind of harmonized investment policy that the potential that I have demonstrated in the first slide will be unlocked. Now, the good thing is that this investment protocol is not actually going to operate on its own. It so happens that for the private sector to have that confidence of operating in a market like the one market within the African continent, there are some linkages that you need. You had in the previous panel where they were talking about the digitalization of the IPAs. So the beauty of what is happening in the continent today under the AfCFTA is that in addition to the investment protocol, we also have a harmonized intellectual property rights protocol that has also been agreed. We have a competition policy protocol that has been agreed. And we are actually on the verge of having an agreement on a digital trade protocol. So you can see the kind of common investment area that is being created by the AfCFTA is one that is going to make it, any investor actually not to have a very good reason not to look at this market because of the linkages between these protocols that I'm talking about, which are going to drive the realization of the benefits of the trading goods and the trading services that I demonstrated have the potential to grow under the continent. So this is the argument for that paradigm shift within the continent. Now, during these last 2 days, we have spoken a lot about the issue of sustainability. So since I've told you that Africa is going to grow a lot in terms of value added intra-African trade, of course the question that comes to mind to you is that, is this transformation going to happen at the expense of the environment? If you're going to have all this value addition, industrialization, industrial transformation taking place within the continent, is this going to happen at the expense of climate change? Is it at the expense of the environment? Is it sustainable? So what we have done here is to say that the climate that is being created under the AfCFTA is actually not going to happen at the expense of the environment. So what we have done at the Economic Commission for Africa is that we have asked ourselves 2 questions. So if you implement the AfCFTA and you have all this industrialization taking place, what happens to the level of carbon emissions within the continent? Of course, remember that Africa contributes very little in terms of carbon emission. And then after asking that question, we said, if Africa was actually going to just meet 50% of its commitment under the UNFCCC or the climate, the nationally determined contributions offers that each of the country has presented, what would that mean? And what if the African countries not only meet their 50% of their nationally determined contributions of what they have said to mitigate against climate change, but you also have financing for the conditional part of the nationally determined contributions? What does that mean for the AfCFTA? And then, of course, we ask a third question. There is this opportunity that is being created that you can actually create carbon credits, and you can sell those carbon credits in the market. There is a price for each of those carbon credits. So we have asked ourselves, what if Africa was to have one harmonized price for carbon? What does that mean? So what we found out is that it is possible to implement the AfCFTA without having the environment, if at the same time Africa, who has already made an offer to work on dealing with issues of carbon emission. So what happens is that there would be an increase of about 0.8% in terms of the volume of carbon emission if you were to do nothing and implement the AfCFTA. But if you were to implement the AfCFTA and also meet your carbon emissions reduction commitments or abatement in terms of what countries have promised and the nationally determined contributions, it is possible actually to reduce the total carbon emissions that are going to be experienced even as Africa industrializes. So if you remember from the first slide, I said that there's going to be a huge growth in intra-African trade by 2045, which was going to be about 34%. That is the additional $200 billion by 2045 in terms of implementing the AfCFTA. If you meet your commitments, if you meet the commitments by addressing the carbon emission issues, there would only be a reduction of 2 percentage points in terms of the volume of carbon emissions. So in other words, it is possible to have a green AfCFTA. So as we talk about the investments, to attract investments within the continent to take advantage of this, I would want to demonstrate to you that it is possible for Africa to not only be able to meet the benefits of the AfCFTA, but it can also be able to do that without harming the environment. Now, the other point I would want to make here, and I will make it very quickly, is to say that it would be even more efficient, because we are talking about climate issues here, it will even be more efficient here if Africa was to set one carbon price rather than each of the African countries making its own carbon price. And I'm saying this because when it comes to attracting investments, we have one common policy now on investment. So you actually want to have a harmonized market also for the carbon credit. And basically we were able to show that it is possible with a price of $25 per ton of carbon to actually be able to have a better outcome than the other two scenarios that I demonstrated. Now, so having said that, let me quickly take you through some of the investment opportunities that the AfCFTA is offering. We have also asked the question, now that I've told you that this is not going to happen at the expense of the environment, we have also asked the question, if that additional trade was to be realized because there are sufficient investments, to do it. What are some of the things that are going to happen? One of the areas that we have found that there is going to be a lot of growth is in the area of transport. So if you are a manufacturer in the area of trucks, the AfCFTA is offering you an opportunity to be one of the beneficiaries of the 2 million trucks that will need in Africa to be able to move trade within the continent, and also provide services that to do with those trucks. Now, if you add what you need for transport, for road transport, for maritime, for air transport, for additional port capacity, there is potential for at least $400 billion in terms of investment opportunities just because of the implementation of the AfCFTA. And this is going to happen across the continent, the different regions of the continent. Now, again, the beauty of what I'm saying is that if you do it in West Africa, you'll be having one market under the AfCFTA. The other example that I would want to provide that the AfCFTA is offering, I said that there's going to be a lot of opportunities for value addition, and you see you would want to have a paradigm shift that allows African countries to add value to its natural resources. So we have an example, and I think the Congo DRC is represented here. So we have this interesting opportunity initiative that is happening in the DRC of how, using the AfCFTA, you actually have two countries, DRC and Zambia, working together to play into the area of the electric cars, the electric vehicles, because they have a lot of the natural resources that are required in the manufacturing or in the production of the batteries that are required for electric cars. So as the Economic Commission for Africa, working with AfrEximbank, we are working with these two countries to see how do you take advantage of the rules, the regulatory regime, the harmonized regime, the opportunities that the AfCFTA is presenting for Africa to start taking advantage of the strategic minerals that it has today, which, as evidence shows, and as we shall hear from the panel, are going to be the ones that drive the renewable energy future or the decarbonization of the world as we move forward. Now, another example I wanted to give here is that the AfCFTA is actually going to really unlock this potential. So here you have an example of where you have research and development taking place in one African country. Here we have taken the example of Kenya because we are talking about how do you take advantage of the original equipment manufacturing that is currently taking place in the area of vehicle manufacturing. So as we move to the electric vehicles, you have an electric vehicle, you have R&D taking place in a country like Kenya. Then you have cell manufacturing taking place in another African country. I think in this case we are showing Algeria. And then you have an electric vehicle assembly that is taking place in Morocco, in Egypt, and South Africa. So you have a situation whereby the AfCFTA is actually going to enable this kind of a regional supply chain of the electric vehicles happening in the continent. I mean, why is this important? Because I think last year we started with this challenge of breakages in the supply chains. And so the AfCFTA is giving you a proposition as an investor to be able to have a supply chain that is resilient and also efficient, most likely, and also efficient within a market of 1.4 billion people and an economic potential, an economic value of about $3.5 billion. Now, and that is what we have today. So by 2050, this is going to be a completely different picture And that is what the AfCFTA is promising to offer to you. So I wanted to stop there. I'll not tell you about what UNECA does to support our member states. I don't think I want to do that here because our acting executive secretary is here. But I would like just to end by saying that there's a huge potential. We have been in this forum for 6 years now. Each year we have told you about the progress of how we are creating this one market. I think we have shown you the potential of this one market that the AfCFTA offers. And we have also told you what the paradigm shift, because that's what we are talking about, what the protocols on investment protocol, competition policy, and intellectual properties and digital trade is going to offer to unlock that market. And I've also told you that this is not going to happen at the expense of the environment. So, Ali, I think I will end it here so that at least we can be able to get to hear more from the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Stephen, you raised a very interesting sort of point related to transport and the needs for transport. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to present this first question to Honorable Pedro. How do you see the role of UNECA supporting the implementation of the AfCFTA and its investment protocol, but keeping in mind some of the challenges and opportunities that Stephen just presented?
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Ali, for this question. As Stephen indicated, making the African Continental Free Trade Area work for Africa will require the concourse of everyone. Institutions like ours that are think tanks. We have a convening function bringing African member states together with the view to formulating common positions, voice, and as well as deploying technical assistance with a view to translating ideas into actions. So this is basically our three main functions. And we do this throughout the continent in close collaboration with or supporting the leadership of the African Union and its organs, as well as the regional economic communities and the member states. So what is at stake? I think first, you would agree with me that it's not because of lack of blueprints that Africa has not yet structurally transformed it. Some of the conversations that we are having today, I would argue that we're part of the discourse of Kwame Nkrumah in the 60s, was part of the building blocks of the Lagos Plan of Action. And so it's not new. What is it that has changed? First, the paradigms. And let me, in particular, pick the Lagos Plan of Action and why is it that we did not succeed sufficiently to advance structural transformation. It was that because during that particular time, structural adjustment was the doctrine, was the paradigm. So the policy space for us to pursue an agenda as revolutionary, for lack of a better word, as the Lagos Plan of Action was not there. I would argue that currently we have a better disposition for those long-term structural adjustments. So industrial policy is better accepted today, whilst before the recipe was about privatization and so on and so forth. Today, almost everyone, West, East, North, and South, are pursuing one form or another industrial policy, and that creates our space. So we are supporting our member states to identifying the opportunities for us to achieve structural transformation. And earlier, Stephen made reference to the study that we've done on the implications of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement on transport and services infrastructure that have identified a business opportunity of about $500 billion. We do this consistently. In November 2021, we organized in Kinshasa the DRC Africa Business Forum, which was underpinned by a study that has revealed that producing battery precursors, so the chemicals that go into the production of batteries, was 3 times cheaper in DRC than in other destinations like, for example, China and the United States. And that the carbon profile was equally better, 25% less carbon emissions than China, for example. So it was with that evidence base that we engage into mobilizing funding and partnerships. We equally now are developing a market for carbon credit on the continent, the carbon credit market. So we organize, for example, utilizing our convening power, bringing our think tanking functions. We organized on the 28th of February this year, the Africa Business Forum on making carbon credit markets work for Africa. So where we went with a number, $120 for a ton of CO2 sequestrated would generate $82 billion for the continent. So we are on many fronts, but one key message that I really want to use this platform to convey is that one of our major failures, if any, is indeed our lack of, our inability to translate these blueprints in transformational change on the ground. So moving from A to B. So implementation would require that we do these things consistently by identifying first what are the opportunities, then looking at what are the institutional frameworks that can support the delivery of those outcomes, and then through mobilizing stakeholders across the entire sort of universe of things that need to be done, by promoting institutional coherence and cohesiveness. So we need, for example, for this huge agenda as the African Continental Free Trade Area, the whole of government approach. We need to have industrial and trade policy to be aligned together. Let me just illustrate why this is important. If, for example, we go and sign a bilateral investment treaty with a country outside the continent, it means that we need to provide to investors coming from that particular country the same treatment as our citizens in Africa. And at the same time, industrial policy on the continent requires local content policies. Local content policies means that you need to give preference to your constituencies on the continent. This is where you have a clear, potential tensions between our bilateral investment treaties and our local content policies. We need, therefore, to look at all of those dimensions. This is where ECA comes to support our member states to understand those tensions and articulating, therefore, options that can balance the two imperatives. One last point, because it's an investment conference, is that I would argue that we need to spend equal amount of time with our domestic investors as we do with our foreign direct investments. When we talk about an enabling environment, in most of our jurisdictions, is about creating an enabling environment for foreign direct investors. We do not spend enough time to understand what are the needs and the requirements of our own investors. I'm here with the Honorable Minister of Industry of Nigeria. Today we have in Nigeria the captains of industry that are building globally competitive conglomerates on the continent. We need to amplify the number of those African captains of industries. This requires an improvement in the quality of the dialogue and the conversations between the government and the domestic investors. Not to talk, of course, of the small and medium enterprises. Here I'm talking of the big ones, the Dangotes of this world that have the platform. I would argue that if you want to create the 16 or 19 to 20 million jobs that we need for our young people, we need to be able to create that privileged platform also for small and medium enterprises and for the informal sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Pedro. You presented a very interesting sort of, challenge that the ECA is having, or a challenge looking at the implementation of the AfCFTA, specifically on implementing this aspect of domestic participation, as you just indicated, but also implementation of the treaty itself, because not all governments are really active on this. When we look at Nigeria, Nigeria is a mammoth in Africa. And we see the examples of Nigeria across the continent, and we hear about this, and we read about this. Honorable Minister, how do you see Nigeria positioning itself to maximize the benefits of AfCFTA? And what can other governments learn from Nigeria?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. Thanks for inviting me. I think for us, one first lesson is that Nigeria wasn't in a hurry to join the AfCFTA. We were like the 34th country because our president said we needed time to educate our people, for them to understand, so that all stakeholders are on board. Because it's not just government, it's the organized private sector, MSMEs, the ordinary citizens. So I think that's the very first lesson. Secondly, we still have a National Action Committee on AfCFTA. That was the body that helped us to prepare up till the point of ratification. So what we're doing with that same body now is to recalibrate it and give it proper structure and funding so that it will now be fully charged with the process of implementation. Furthermore, we've established a National Office for Trade Negotiations because there's definitely a link between what happens with the AfCFTA and other trade regulations and our other trading partners outside the continent. So that office as well is being given a legal backing. And we're very lucky to have a very experienced former deputy director of the WTO heading that office. Right now, we're also preparing an AfCFTA readiness fund, because for AfCFTA to be effective, definitely you're going to need financing. And government has to take the lead, and we're carrying along all our financial institutions as well as the organized private sector, so that this fund is actually fit for purpose. Otherwise, we don't want to establish a fund that will not deliver on the mandate. There's also a big plan for MSME participation. So there's a kind of pipeline that's been developed so that at least we start with 500 to 1,000 MSMEs to enable them understand how they are going to benefit from this fund and what exactly is the role expected. There's been a lot of workshops being carried out either by the ministry itself, by agencies of government, at different state levels. As you know, we have 36 states and the federal capital, and it's a huge country. And I was saying at the last panel, we have over 41 million MSMEs. So you really need to get the people engaged. We're also looking at, our priority sectors. Okay, before then, the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari has done a massive investment in infrastructure. So we have our rail lines up and going. It's not been completed, but at least from the coast, Lagos, going right up to the north, and in fact is going into Niger Republic. We have a lot of expressways that have been built, bridges, new airports, seaports, a lot of new seaports. All this infrastructure is necessary for AfCFTA to succeed, both within the country and in order for you to reach the neighboring countries, so that you now link up on this Africa network of transportation. Now, we've also looked at some of our traditional priority sectors and trying to tweak them. So in agriculture, it's not just agriculture. Mr. President said we must grow what we eat and eat what we grow as a nation. We used to be massive importers of rice, but today Nigeria is self-sufficient in rice production. Now, the same, you look at areas where we have post-harvest losses, tomatoes, for example. During the season, you have a lot of tomatoes, and then suddenly there is, the tomatoes have gone up and so on. So we have policies being put in place to look at some of these strategic sectors and try and give incentives so that those that can come in to manufacture, take the tomatoes, crush them, turn them into purees, rather than continue to import. Energy is a big area, particularly renewable energy. Last month, 2 months ago in March, we were able to do the groundbreaking ceremony for the largest solar cell manufacturing facility in West Africa. It's something costing about $230 million or so. So you look at these areas because we look at the energy deficit. And for us to get industry up and going, we have to bridge that gap in terms of industry. A lot of emphasis on ICTs, digital economy, startups. And I'm pleased to say that we have a young population that's very tech savvy, and we're proud to boast of between 5 and 6 startups that have become unicorns, all from Nigeria. So you have the creative industry, and for the creative industry, a lot is happening. It's not just Nollywood. Nollywood is very important, but you have a lot of people coming up, young people, MSMEs, in the fashion industry, and so on and so forth. The last thing I would need to mention is trade facilitation. We're strengthening and really reinvigorating our institutions, especially the customs. We're providing scanners, training them, because if you have all these plans and the institutions that will deliver on the plans are not fully engaged and prepared, then you have a problem, because the customs are usually the first in terms of goods. In terms of services for free movement of people, we've completely modernized our immigration services. So I would like to stop at that point, and then later on maybe we can engage some more. Thank you.
I think, Honorable Mariam, what you end up doing was create a picture that if I'm correct, you have workshops, you're training people, you are investing in energy, and you're trying to find the gaps before the gaps even occur. And I think the rest of Africa really needs to be aware that Nigeria is really going to, if they continue like this and other countries, don't, then they're really going to dominate. And I think that what that does is it creates an opportunity for other countries to also look at lessons learned, all right? And on that note, I would like to end up presenting this next question to Mr. Kamole. We see what Nigeria is doing. We see what other countries are doing. And we also know that DRC is perhaps the most strategically located country in all of Africa. It's in the middle of Africa. And it is perhaps, in my opinion, and no one needs to quote this, but perhaps the most resource-endowed country in the world. Okay. Today, AfCFTA presents an opportunity for the country an opportunity for DRC to diversify its economy, boost trade with other African nations, and improve prospects in manufacturing, as well as exports, as well as agri-industries. What specific steps and strategies is your organization, ANAPI, taking to create a more sustainable and suitable business environment to foster private sector growth in DRC in order to capitalize on the opportunities provided by the free trade area? And can you comment on specific priority sectors such as agro-processing, pharmaceuticals, transport, and logistics and automotives?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, His Excellency, for the comment you made. I will say that the DRC is also an opportunity for the ZLECAf for the FCTA to be in a good position. Not only the ZLECAf, it presents an opportunity because, the country presents the market. It's very important to state on that because we have more than 100 million of population, and then it's a market for the ZLECAf. So we need to state it. And then what is the role we are doing? What is the strategy we are doing? I will say that as an IPA, Investment Promotion Agency, we have doing the traditional role to promote environment and to be at the initiative of some reforms because, the FCTA coming with some standards. We need to have the same laws according to the trade, according to taxation, according to transportation, logistics, and then things like that. And then we are working with government first to align our laws. It will need times because we have a framework of laws which normally we need to teach to SMEs, to teach to some companies, to teach to some provinces, to teach to politics, to learn, to let them know that we need to go to that direction because we have agreed to go to this FCTA. And then what we are doing is to align the law of trade, how to create a company very fastly because we need to have people to be in our market. And then how to adapt our taxation system as for income tax, as for VAT tax, as for withholding tax. We need to be at the same level maybe for Nigeria, maybe for Ivory Coast, maybe for, this kind of situation need people to be teach on that. But is it simple? That's the question. Is it simple now? You can listen to His Excellency. Her Excellency mentioned that we need to teach people. Is it simple that people can understand that the country needs to be aligned to some countries who has another level of standardization? This will take time. This will take shift of mindset. It's very important. At the capital in Kinshasa, people can understand. But when we go to the real place, people need to be at a same level of understandings that we are moving in a huge market. This will create opportunity to evacuate maybe the products of agriculture, not only in DRC, but outside in DRC. And then for that, we need also to have some same level of standardization of products. If the tomato in DRC has a certain level of standardization, is it the same in Gabon? Is it the same in Nigeria? Is it the same in Ivory Coast? If we are in competition between all the countries, do we have the tomato for DRC to be present in Nigeria at the same level of Nigeria? That's the question we need to have. So we need to work on agricultural standardization for some kind of speculation. This situation is very important. And then to come back to your other question, what is the specific situation coming from agro-industry, the specific situation coming from transportation, from logistics? We have a lot of opportunities. 80 million of arable land, 100 million population, 9 countries bordering us. So we present 200 million consumers. So today, if you have a market in DRC, you will touch 9 countries, with DRC 10 countries. So this is a huge opportunity. When I go back to Nigeria, it's not the same because Nigeria has a huge opportunity because of population. As you mentioned, we have this kind of mineral resources, the cobalt. We have the worldwide capital of cobalt. The lithium, we have it. And then His Excellency has mentioned that we have the initiative with Zambia, but we are pretty sure that we cannot go to the success ourselves. We need to be in a relationship with some country. That's the AfCFTA is a good opportunity for people to make, to have the, I would say that, to be together, to unlock the potentiality. We cannot unlock our potentiality ourselves. We need the expertise coming from maybe Zambia, coming from Botswana, coming from Congo-Brazza, coming from Ivory Coast, coming from Ghana. And we need it. And then coming from tourism, for instance. We need people coming from tourism. If you go to Tanzania, we need to have this kind of situation to be the same. So we are unlocking our potentiality. For transportation, for instance, we have a huge project coming from the Lualaba, which will go through all our country, and then we can move in South Africa, in Central Africa, and even in Chad. But do we need to do it ourselves? We need to be together with people. This is very key. And then we are working to teach people the AfCFTA laws. People need to be aligned. People need to know what we need. People need to need objectives. But the question is, we have the AfCFTA, but we have the sub-regional also bilateral treaty. What will happen for this bilateral treaty? What will happen for objectives? What will happen for the interest? What will happen for the priority of the country? So we need to be aligned on that. And then I can just hand on that, and maybe I will answer after.
Yeah, I mean, and again, just attached to this, these other treaties, DRC has just entered into the EAC.
Yeah.
Okay? And I think leveraging what you have with the EAC and the potential future AfCFTA can really position DRC as such a magnanimous economic force in Africa that can really be the hub for Central Africa and Southern Africa and be a feeder into the rest of North Africa as well. All right? I mean, this is just an opinion of mine.
But the same question, but the answer...
Let me just add this, but I think the biggest challenge comes down to logistics.
Yeah.
All right? And when we heard Stephen's, presentation, he mentioned 2 million trucks. I mean, that alone is an incredible sort of opportunity for investors to see, look at the transportation logistics environment. And even setting up in a place like DRC as a central point can really look at feeding improved transportation across Africa.
We can have the same answer and the same question to people who are in UMOA. Is it the good question that we say that we have these kind of opportunities? But we need to know that for the AfCFTA, a big issue will be the currency. The big issue with the currency. If in UMOA they're using another currency, in EAC some countries are using maybe shillings, we are using francs Congolese. And, in some other countries, they are using CFA. So what will happen? It's not tracks. Do we have one currency for all the countries?
So that's
do we go to that position? This panel is very dangerous for me. Maybe I will be fired next week. I don't know, but I accept the AfCFTA. It's very important. But we need to touch the good question for the AfCFTA.
So maybe I ask that question next to Miss Emily.
Yeah.
Mr. Kamole just spoke about currency. All right. Today you are from the AfCFTA Secretariat. What challenges are faced by African countries in harmonizing their investment regulations, and how can this investment protocol really be achieved if we have issues related to currency as an example, transportation as an example, and in harmonizing even trade?
Thank you very much, and I think honorable ministers and other ministers I'm here on behalf of His Excellency Wamkele, and I'm really thankful to the UNECA to be here today. I think following up on what has just been said, and definitely the fact that one of the key objectives of the AfCFTA as a whole is to have the single African market. So it's how do we get to the single African market? And I like going back to the core of our work, which is really the liberalization of trading goods and trading services. So the key work that we are doing is to liberalize that. And then what are the key other policies that then we need to develop to make sure that we underpin this liberalization that has taken place? And that is where, as presented by Dr. Karinge, is where then we have the linkage with issues related to competition policy, issues related to investment policy, what are our policies as regards intellectual property rights, what are the policies now because of the future and where we are right now, digital trade. So those are at the core. And then also there is the issues of women and youth in trade and supporting them. So that is how the AfCFTA now is structured. And then there is the elements of, if there are any disputes, what then shall we do? And that is why we have the dispute settlement mechanism also embedded in it. Because once you start trading, definitely some disputes will come on. Now coming on to the issue of investment as one of the key pillars to underpin the liberalization that is taking place, we have worked to come up with a protocol that will then assist in the harmonization of the laws and regulations that are key, as mentioned by Dr. Karinge, in the 4 areas of investment. Now, once we have done that, what next? It's now we have to ensure that our state parties, as we call them, those are members of the member states of the African Union that have ratified the agreement. It then becomes important and key that we assist our state parties to actually implement that agreement. Because if member states don't implement, then it's as good as a wasted time. So what we are doing now is actually developing strategies to assist member states in their implementation of the protocol. How are they going to be able to align their laws and regulation with the harmonized laws and regulation that now we have for the continent, and build the awareness and sensitization and capacity building of our different agencies to actually be able to do that. And to that end, one of the key elements we have done is the development of what we call the private sector strategy. And under the private sector strategy, 4 key areas have been identified. Automobiles, which is also part of what was in the presentation. Then we have the pharmaceutical sector. And then we have the agro-processing. And last but not least, we have the linkage then with looking at it from the point of transport and logistics. Because as has mentioned by our colleague from the DRC, if you do not handle the issues of logistics, then you will not be able to do much. And then digitalization to make sure that not only that the market access that has been achieved, you also need to develop tools that will make it easier for that trade to happen. And one of the other key tools that we have developed is what we call the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. Now, what that tool is meant to do is actually to take the 42 different currencies in Africa and then trade in your local currencies. So let's give the example of the Nigerian Naira and the Ghanaian cedis, because those are the 2 countries that have already started implementing the PAPs. And the trader in Nigeria can actually pay the supplier in Ghana in Naira, which is then converted dynamically and at real time into Ghanaian cedis. And then that trade happens. And it's using commercial banks, of course, approved by their central banks. So you can already see there is a lot that is happening already. And that, of course, then will help us to deal with the issue of the different currencies before we reach the common currency in the continent when we get there. And then there is a second element, and I think Honorable Minister touched on it a little bit, the issue of having the credit or the funding to support the trade or the SMEs that need to trade for us to have more intra-African trade. And in this case, we have what we're calling the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund. The adjustment fund is in three categories. We have the what we call the BEST fund, which is meant to assist state parties once they start the implementation, and then they get the reduction in revenue, and so they will then need to get a boost before they get the diversified other areas to trade in, and that one is, it's like a grant, but so there is a calculation that is being done to see what are the losses that the different countries will have, and then how then do you assist the countries to actually bridge that gap. There is a second part of the fund, which is called the general base fund, where countries, when they want to diversify into other productive areas of the economy, can then apply to get a very low-priced credit from the fund, and then they're able then to diversify into other productive sectors of the economy. Then there is a third one, which we call the credit fund. And with the credit fund, really, here it's where even the private sector can actually apply to say, I have a project that is a bankable project, and so I go and get funding. And the adjustment fund, and both the adjustment fund and the PAPs, the AfCFTA is being supported by the Afrexim Bank to actually push forward these two key operational tools that we have. So this is just an example of the work that we are already undertaking in terms of assisting our member states to actually be able to take advantage of the opportunities that are being made available under the AfCFTA agreement, and also to align their own national policies, and as you've mentioned, the regional policies are also an issue, and we do have some of the regions now moving on then to the issues of investment as a whole. We do have national investment policies, we have regional investment policies, and so we need to align all these to now this continental common agreement that we have at the AfCFTA level. And maybe just one key element of what is contained also in the protocol, and here maybe to say that the protocol was adopted by our heads of states and government this February. So now ours is really now to operationalize it. And one of the key elements contained in it is what we are calling the Pan-African Trade and Investment Agency. Now, the agency is key because the agency is meant to assist us to then promote Africa as one and look at what are the key bankable projects that especially are cross-border, so they go beyond one country, and how then do we ensure that we promote those projects and get the right investors for them. We saw in the presentation by Dr. Karinge the issue of transport and logistics. So that is one of the key issues with the support of Afrexim Bank also, that we are looking at how do we support maritime transport in particular in the continent, because that has been a thorn in the flesh, if I may put it that way, that most of the cargo moving from one African country to another has to go sometime to Asia or Europe or other continents before it can come back to the continent. So how do we ensure that if it means investing in smaller cargo ships, how do we do that to ensure that it makes it easier for us in Africa to trade between ourselves? There was the issue mentioned of customs-related issues. How do we harmonize our customs-related issues in terms of not going even beyond what we are calling one border posts at this juncture to no stop border posts, whereby we digitalize our borders such that trucks can be able to move easily. That means we also need to deal with issues of free movement of people, because if you are not going to stop, then it means we have also dealt with the issue of movement of people. So there is a lot of work that we still have to do, and we are not saying we cannot do it. We are saying that it is possible to do it. And I know, as I was talking to someone earlier, there is a lot of expectation also to make sure that the AfCFTA works. And we are really working together with our member states to make sure that we move forward the process and actually achieve the AfCFTA.
All right, and a couple comments on what you indicated. One, you spoke about entities will be able to pay in their own regional currencies or their own sort of national currencies. Number two is the Africa as One sort of initiative. Related to the first, and I know that many countries, and this is a contentious topic, but one that Nigeria has already started doing very well, has been the introduction of CBDCs, okay? But also the growth of crypto in Africa has really taken significant strides. And I'm not sure if the AfCFTA is looking at this in terms of potentially trading through digital currencies, but this is an option, I'm sure, that has already been tabled. But at the same time, looking at the trading as one and addressing comparative advantages and competitive advantages that specific countries have. Okay, so perhaps maybe if you can just touch on a comment or two on those, all right, and then I have an interesting question for our other neighbor from Senegal.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. As I mentioned, we are actually working on a protocol on digital trade. Now, under the protocol, one of the key elements we are looking at are the different, or what we're calling digital financial services, whereby we have the payment, different payment products that are coming up, and of course, fintechs are one of the key areas. And here we also need to thank Nigeria, because they are leading the way when it comes to fintechs and even the laws and regulation. And I believe just last week, there is a law and regulation that was adopted in Nigeria that is dealing with digital assets and in addition to cryptocurrencies and how to bring them in. Now, because most of the countries have not allowed for cryptocurrency, and I know Kenya is among the countries that are still saying, we are still thinking about it and we are not ready, especially because of macroeconomic related issues, to bring on, and by extension also economic issues, that to bring in the issue of cryptocurrencies. But we are looking at it in terms of emerging technologies and how can we use these financial assets to really be able to trade across Africa. And as for now, the one that we are really working on is the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System to ensure that we are able to easily trade across Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. In light of this, when we look at Senegal, we see that Senegal initiated a program known as the Joint Project between Enhanced Integrated Framework, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and the International Islamic Trade Finance Corporation sought to support an operationalization of the AfCFTA in 8 African countries, where Senegal was key. This initiative is expected to foster more efficient and inclusive trade, ultimately leading to job creation and economic opportunities. As the Director General of APEX, could you elaborate on the specific initiatives APEX is undertaking to implement or planning to support the objectives of this important project, particularly in terms of job creation and fostering economic opportunities to the Senegalese populations?
Merci beaucoup. Je vais parler en français. Je voulais d'abord vous remercier pour l'honneur et l'invitation qui nous a été faite pour venir participer à ce panel, un panel important. Et je salue la présence de mes collègues, dont notre collègue de la RDC, avec qui nous partageons l'association des agences de promotion d'investissement.
Yes.
Le Sénégal, bien entendu, comme vous l'avez dit, est un membre important de la ZLECAf, une organisation de libre-échange intercontinentale qui est entrée en vigueur depuis janvier 2021. Et donc, nous sommes totalement et pleinement engagés dans le programme qui déjà est entré en vigueur. Et bien entendu, comme on l'a dit tantôt, pour que la ZLECAf puisse entrer en vigueur, il faut d'abord une harmonisation des législations. Je pense que c'est important. Le Sénégal travaille dans l'harmonisation de sa législation avec les pays qui l'entourent, en travaillant sur les corridors, mais aussi de façon interne à faire des modifications de son code des investissements, son code du travail, avoir une justice commerciale aussi crédible. Donc nous avons transformé et modifié la justice commerciale. Maintenant, dans un cadre d'échange interafricain, on a parlé tantôt de l'importance des infrastructures. Le Sénégal, l'APIX, l'agence que j'ai l'honneur de diriger, a cette particularité d'être à la fois une agence de promotion des investissements, mais aussi une agence qui travaille dans les grands travaux. Donc le Sénégal a engagé ces derniers temps un vaste programme de création d'infrastructures de dimension de classe mondiale. Nous avons un aéroport international de classe mondiale. Nous avons construit des infrastructures ferroviaires. Nous avons aussi un vaste programme de construction d'autoroutes pour relier d'abord les différentes villes du Sénégal, mais aussi le Sénégal avec le reste de l'Afrique, nos pays voisins, la Mauritanie, la Gambie, la Guinée-Bissau, mais aussi le Mali et la Guinée-Conakry. Donc nous sommes en train de construire des ouvrages d'interconnexion, des ponts au niveau entre le Sénégal et la Mauritanie, entre le Sénégal et la Gambie. Et nous sommes en train de construire d'autres ouvrages d'interconnexion sur le domaine ferroviaire avec le Mali. Donc je considère que c'est important d'abord de travailler sur les ouvrages d'interconnexion, de réformer les législations au niveau interne, d'harmoniser un peu les échanges et de créer des corridors sûrs. Donc le Sénégal est en train de travailler sur ça. Un autre facteur qui était important de tenir en compte pour être compétitif, c'est l'énergie. Nous nous sommes rendus compte que les coûts de l'énergie étaient un facteur bloquant dans la compétitivité de nos entreprises. Parce que pour capter, pour être compétitif dans ce vaste marché de libre-échange qui polarise 1,4 milliard de personnes, il était important d'abord que nous soyons nous-mêmes compétitifs. Donc, au Sénégal, nous avons une politique industrielle qui est définie et qui est en train de prendre une autre tournure. D'abord, pour essayer de créer ce qu'on appelle des agropoles, de créer des zones économiques spéciales, mais aussi de moderniser notre tissu industriel de manière à rendre nos entreprises compétitives. Et un des facteurs importants pour que ces entreprises soient compétitives, c'est le coût de l'énergie. Réduire le coût de l'énergie, le rendre compétitif, accessible à tous. Le Sénégal, aujourd'hui, a accès à ce qu'on appelle... nous sommes devenus un pays producteur de pétrole et de gaz. C'est ce qui fait que d'ailleurs les perspectives économiques du Sénégal sont excellentes. Si vous regardez les agrégats macroéconomiques du Sénégal, nous nous projetons d'avoir un taux de croissance pour cette année de près de 10% et nous allons nous maintenir dans les 10 prochaines années sur les top 10 des 10 économies les plus croissantes au monde, avec plus de 10% de taux de croissance. Mais cela a été favorisé par l'arrivée du gaz et du pétrole. Nous sommes en train aussi de diversifier nos sources d'énergie avec les énergies renouvelables, le solaire, l'éolien, et nous allons bien entendu, à partir de l'année 2027, créer un mix énergétique qui va nous permettre de baisser drastiquement le coût de l'énergie Aujourd'hui, le kilowatt se situe entre 80 à 120 francs CFA le kilowatt. Nous pensons pouvoir le baisser jusqu'à au-delà, en dessous de 40 francs, ce qui rendrait d'abord les facteurs de production beaucoup plus compétitifs. Donc, de façon générale, le Sénégal, pour bien entrer dans l'ère de la ZLECAF, est en train de se moderniser, de construire des infrastructures, aussi bien dans le domaine des transports, mais aussi dans le domaine de l'énergie. Nous construisons beaucoup de centrales solaires, des centrales photovoltaïques. Nous avons notre gaz qui va être développé, mais aussi nous construisons beaucoup d'écoles de formation parce que pour bien implémenter, pour bien capter tout ce qui va être fait, il nous faut avoir des ressources humaines de qualité. Donc, dans le domaine du pétrole, nous avons l'Institut national de formation pour les métiers du pétrole. Nous sommes en train de créer des écoles dans l'automobile, mais aussi des écoles dans beaucoup d'autres domaines de formation. Et nous sommes surtout en train de créer des zones économiques spéciales qui, nous considérons, si elles sont bien exploitées, pourront nous permettre de réduire notre balance commerciale, mais aussi de créer beaucoup d'emplois pour les jeunes, parce que c'est cela qu'il s'agit. Et nous sommes en cela en collaboration avec beaucoup d'autres structures sœurs, comme Tangemed, comme Dubai Port Road, et puis avec Diabel Ali Free Zone qui nous aide un peu dans l'implémentation et l'expérimentation de cette zone-là. Donc nous sommes totalement prêts et engagés au Sénégal pour entrer dans l'aide de la ZLECAF dans tous les domaines, et surtout les domaines sur lesquels il faut être compétitif pour avoir une économie saine. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. So earlier I had indicated that we had problems in the past in implementing our agendas because we were not doing things coherently and consistently. I think we've had examples from Nigeria in particular where it was not only about the effort to try and domesticate a continental blueprint, so those consultation process. And yes, indeed, Honorable Minister, we had to come twice to Nigeria to be able to mobilize the private sector in particular to accepting that the CFTA is the way to go. So when we have blueprints, we need policies that are aligned and the laws and regulations that are aligned with that blueprint. We need the institutions, we need the people, capacity building, and so on and so forth. This is what can lead us from A to Z, and this is what we are not doing in the past coherently. So I think there's a little hope there that this time around we will be able to get things done. And the African CFTA Secretariat, I think, also has indicated that things are moving. Now, I wanted to talk about building beyond our current comparative advantages and why we need to invest in science, technology, innovation for us to be able to continue to be competitive for longer periods of time. The example that I like to use is Nokia. As you know, Nokia used to be a leading mobile telephony maker. They had a significant share of the market share, but because they did not invest in research and development, and others like Apple and Samsung were investing in smartphones, they lost their market share. It means that, for example, countries like DRC, that today have 70% of the cobalt, that represents a huge comparative advantage should also look at what others are doing. The rest of the world, as you know, wants to reduce its dependence on Africa for what they call the critical minerals. We need to look at how can we build comparative advantages beyond the existing endowments. This is absolutely critical as part of our industrial policies. Another important dimension, of course, all of us are racing to achieve the net zero targets. And if we do, and so we are very happy to see that as part of our effort to implement the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, we are equally mindful of the need to pursue a green trajectory. So the deployment of renewable energy is critical because, for example, in Europe, soon we will have already net zero borders, meaning our productions, if they do not meet the carbon targets as specified in the European Union Green Deal, we will not be able to export to those markets. So that understanding those paradigms it's important part of how we need to prepare ourselves to continue to be competitive. So this is where greening our industrial development and trade policy is critical for us to be competitive moving forward. And talking about making Africa a globally competitive investment destination, I think one thing that is happening that is very reassuring is that we are seeing the multilateral development banks coming together to de-risk investments on the continent. Here I'm talking about AfricXimbank, the African Finance Corporation, the African Development Bank. By the way, the three CEOs of these three multilateral development banks are Nigerians. So we have to take note of that. But Badea is equally playing an important role. So, and they are supporting the special economic zones. I think the honorable delegate of Senegal made reference to the special economic zones. I think they are an important part of the implementation pathways because unfortunately we still have market constraints in terms of supply of energy, the quality of our overall legal and regulatory environments and so on. And the special economic zones are one way of alleviating those problems for our investors, especially at an initial stage, while we try to create an enabling environment across our countries. So AfricXimbank, the African Finance Corporations through ARISE, for example, are playing an important role to making the necessary investments in those special economic zones to then catalyze other investments moving forward. This is what we are doing together with those institutions in the DRC, Zambia transboundary special economic zone that will enable the emergence of the value chain that Stephen Karingi made reference to that. Let me, on that one, initially our modeling was based for the production of battery precursors, moving DRC from 11 billion market, which is the mining market, to a 271 or $51 billion, which is the battery precursor market. After the study that we have done on the CFTA implications for transport and services infrastructure, now we are moving towards the electric vehicle market. And that electric vehicle market, as I said yesterday, represents by 2025 about $7.7 or $8 trillion, but by 2050 will represent $46 trillion. And so we are changing the entire pre-feasibility study and our feasibility study with the view to capturing that market. What does that mean in practice? that will facilitate the emergence of regional value chains beyond DRC and Zambia, where, for example, countries like Nigeria, like Kenya, like South Africa, Morocco, Senegal, Egypt, and so on, that have already some, especially South Africa, Morocco, and Egypt, that have already some automotive capabilities there, that will be able to link the supply of the batteries from DRC and Zambia to those centers. So it is an integrated African regional value chain. And those are some of the options that we need to look at when we are talking about the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. How can we link where we have the natural resources with the production centers on the continent? So we are working together with the different institutions to try and identify where are the growth potential on the continent. So one of the things of the A to Z, the one thing leads to another, is indeed to invest on all of those fundamentals. The growth diagnostic studies, identifying, for example, what are the most interesting export destinations for our countries within the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area. In other words, we need an ecosystem that is very well integrated, interlinked, for us to be able to make sure that everyone on the continent comes out as a winner. Otherwise, it's going to be winners and losers, notwithstanding the adjustment fund that Afreximbank has deployed in Kigali. We need to go beyond the adjusting funds. This is important as an initial phase for us to overcome the reluctance in joining this free trade area. So, carbon credit markets.
I'll come to that.
Okay.
Let me end. Yeah. Thank you, Honorable Pedro. I think you gave a very interesting perspective, but a very vast sort of amount of information for us to consume. What I'm going to do now is just going to particularly go into some of the countries and what they're doing. And Honorable Minister, Nigeria faced a very contentious election period and economic challenge from 2015 to 2021. During this time, your country experienced 2 recessions and an average GDP growth of 1.1%, and a soaring unemployment rate and underemployment rates of 56.1% in 2020. These factors contributed to 133 million Nigerians living in multidimensional poverty, and the economy struggled with low productivity and weak expansion, as well as high unemployment sectors. Considering the recent economic challenges faced by Nigeria and the potential opportunities presented by the AfCFTA for enhancing value chains and cross-border trade, how is Nigeria working to capitalize on these opportunities to attract investment, foster trade, and promote a more inclusive economic growth to address the issues of unemployment, underemployment, and multidimensional poverty?
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, when you say contentious election period, I think in Africa, where you have vibrant democracies, I haven't seen where the elections have not been contentious. So, you know, you look at the countries and name it. Yes, we went into recession, but very quickly got out of it. And the important thing is that within the period that you mentioned, a little bit overlaps into the COVID-19 period. So during that time, what did we do to ensure that the economy kept going and we were preparing for the future? The administration established what was called the National Economic Sustainability Plan, which was about 2.3 trillion naira. And several activities were undertaken. And I think I'll just mention those that have impact on trade and investment, and then those that had impact on poverty, alleviation or unemployment. So a couple of the interventions that looked at the issue of trade, we had an MSME survival fund, which basically was trying to make sure the micro, small, and medium enterprises continued production. Because once production stopped, then you know that there'll be problems with the economy at large. So, and thereby payroll support was given, grants were given. We made sure as many MSMEs who were not formalized were given access to free formalization by government. But we also had the 50 billion naira export expansion facility, which now prepared entities to understand the processes for export. Because it's not like you're in West Africa, you just take your goods and cross the border and go into Benin. We now had proper workshops, and I think to that extent, the International Finance Corporation also assisted us. So we built a lot of capacity for people to export, and this was quickly followed up after COVID with the establishment of trade houses. So we've gone into a couple of African countries. We've established a trade house in Lomé, Togo. We've established in Cairo, Egypt. We've established in Nairobi, Kenya. We've also established in China, just in the last 2 months or so. And the main purpose of the trade houses is to ensure that those MSMEs that are unable to meet, they're usually medium-sized exporters. So they perhaps don't have the contacts. So we've taken their goods straight into other countries. And these trade houses are there. The nationals can come, have a look, immediately make contacts with the exporters. Also, another good example is Nigeria and South Africa decided to set up a joint ministerial advisory council, which is chaired by myself and my colleague from South Africa, to advise government on trade matters. So these are the kind of collaborations that have happened. Then the issue of poverty. In 2019, Mr. President decided, instead of having silos of interventions, creating social safety nets here and there, we created a ministry dedicated, a Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development. And within that ministry, and in fact, prior to that ministry, there were various interventions targeting small-scale enterprises, individuals. You had, for example, what was called trader money. It's a very short-term credit or grant given to traders in the market. You had Empower, whereby graduates who have finished from school do not have jobs, but they come and they're skilled under this program. And most of the time, at the end of this program, they either become self-employed or they easily get employment. You also had a lot of interventions by some of our agencies, like the Industrial Training Fund, trying to provide vocational training so that individuals can be up and running. One other component of the economic sustainability plan had to do with providing solar power to 5 million households, because of the realization that a lot of MSMEs operate perhaps from the household. So you had all these interventions that were all geared towards keeping the economy going, as well as addressing the issues of poverty. Of course, when you look at the index, you do wonder that despite all that you read, the Nigerian economy has been growing from strength to strength. Then I think I would also need to mention that part of the strengthening of or opening up of the economy. The issue of special economic zones or free trade zones have been mentioned substantively. We have about 57 in the country. 11 are public owned, whereas you have about maybe up to 40, 46 that are private sector led. But you probably have 26 that are really, really up and doing. And these are you look at the Dangote Free Trade Zone, where you have the refinery set. There's a Lekki Deep Sea Port. So a lot of these interventions are, one, looking at the Nigerian economy, because these free trade zones also generate employment. But on the other side, they're also helping us prepare for full implementation of the AfCFTA.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. You spoke about these free trade zones. One key area that right now is impacting Africa is green energy and the environment. And this is something that now we're starting to see the potential sort of green zones being created. Emily, how can the AfCFTA investment protocol look to attract investments, particularly that drive this green transition and contribute to the development of initiatives like the battery and vehicle ecosystem and the agro-industrial park and green zones across Africa? Because this is one of the key catalysts for where we see Africa moving forward over the course of the next 20 years, especially today with COP28 coming to Abu Dhabi in November. How can Africa position itself to drive this sort of initiative?
Okay. So when we look at the different countries, and here we are looking at it from the point of view of what are they really doing when it comes to... You can't hear her?
Yes.
Oh, yes, sorry. Okay. So we're looking at it from the different countries and what are the different areas that they're now covering when it comes to what we would call the green transition, and dealing with the different key elements of ensuring that they work towards what we call I would say net zero, as has been spoken in the different meetings, and the targets that have been set by the COP27. And most of the countries are now looking at green investments and moving towards transitioning and ensuring that they have policies that ensure they look at it. And I know, and I will look at my notes to see which countries we do have, and I think I don't know whether it's because we have Honorable Minister here, we keep saying Nigeria, but to say Nigeria is actually setting the pace in most of these areas. And there is a bond that Nigeria did, it was being called Green, Social and Sustainable Bond Market, that raised finance that looked at how then do you transition into the green economy. We have countries like Burkina Faso that have implemented what they are calling the new investment code, that then lowers the performance obligation for investors that are in the green and renewable energy sectors. Ethiopia, which has developed a climate resilient green economy strategy, and it actually does give the key steps that need to be taken into consideration for that to happen. We have Namibia, which is looking at having sustainable green hydrogen policy. And they've also developed the implementation plan that goes with it. Zambia, that has also adopted a green economy as one of the main pillars of its development pathway. And they even now have a ministry that is actually focused on the green economy. We have Mauritius, which is in the process of finalizing an economic wide roadmap that will reduce waste generation in the countries. So you see a lot of countries that are actually ensuring that they take care of issues related to achieving the net zero, and how then to ensure that they have the green transition to a greener economy, and also to attract then green investments into their economies.
And is this part of the AfCFTA agenda on green energy, or is it something that countries have individually pursued? Because I know DRC has pushed on its own agenda to look at renewable energies and create, an environment for, battery production. But that's another question that I'll ask right after. But is this part of the AfCFTA agenda for countries to do this, or is it an individual sort of initiative by countries?
Okay, what I will say is that we do have a chapter in the agreement, that in the investment protocol, that actually looks at climate change related issues and sustainable development. So there is a push to try and ensure that we have issues related to climate change taken care of in the investments that countries, or the proposals that countries develop for investors to come into the market. But as a wider agenda, no, because it's not one of the mandates that we yet have as the AfCFTA. But as I mentioned earlier to some colleagues, we do have some areas in our negotiations in the area of trade in services, where we look at the environmental sector and looking at how do you then liberalize that sector to ensure that you take care of environmental issues. And then there is also negotiations that are coming up on energy-related services, where issues of renewable energy then are going to be handled. And so we will have maybe what I can call a harmonized policy when it comes to energy-related services and the regulations that go with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in relation to this, I think that DRC has taken a leap forward, because we see, this sort of push toward a global energy transition where we have an abundance of cobalt, copper, and lithium used in electric vehicles and renewable energy sources. Mr. Kamole, could you explain to me, how did this become one of the major agendas of DRC? Because it's being spoken about in so many different publications globally that DRC has engaged in this sort of EV battery production and lithium production. But at the same time, I'm certain that the offsets that this is going to potentially create will add a significant value to the DRC.
Alors, I will go in French. Maybe I will just put French and English in the same time. Je pense que tout à l'heure, le keynote speaker avait présenté déjà la situation qui existe entre ce que nous sommes en train de faire, la mutualisation d'efforts avec la Zambie, la RDC, pour montrer combien la question du lithium présente. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay. Je vais revenir à la question. Je pense que tout à l'heure, le keynote speaker avait déjà montré comment cette mutualisation d'efforts représente ce qu'on appelle un réel effort entre deux pays dans l'initiative LECAF, pour montrer combien deux pays, Zambie et RDC, mettent ensemble leurs possibilités et leurs potentialités pour qu'on arrive finalement à créer ce qu'on appelle cette capacité d'industrie réelle sur la production des batteries électriques et finalement des véhicules électriques. Et ça montre que les marchés des deux pays vont finalement bénéficier de l'expertise qu'il faut, vont bénéficier des capacités de ces différents pays pour qu'on puisse avancer là-dessus. Maintenant, à partir du moment où on a ces deux mutualisations d'efforts qui se mettent en place, nous avons une chaîne de valeur qui se met et qui est en train de se développer. Cette chaîne de valeur, c'est la question local content des deux pays significatifs, des deux pays respectifs, la question de développement de l'industrie des différents pays. Je note par exemple la production de certains fournisseurs de services qui peuvent exister, l'un dans la distribution, l'autre dans la consommation, l'autre dans l'existence d'un certain nombre de produits, ce qui fait en sorte que nous sommes en train de se dire que cette initiative Zambie-RDC est aussi un élément qui, du reste, a déjà été présenté et qui est totalement une initiative louable qui nous permet d'avancer. Maintenant, lorsque je reviens sur la question des énergies vertes, nous avons aujourd'hui le développement de ce qu'on appelle de l'électricité à base d'hydrogène qui est aujourd'hui au niveau de Inga. Ça qui montre que nous sommes en train d'aller vers une énergie propre qui permet à ce que nous puissions plus développer une énergie qui va faire en sorte qu'il y aura moins de pollution, il y aura moins d'éléments qui nous permettent de pouvoir polluer en fait ce que nous amenons au niveau de l'environnement. Je vais revenir sur un certain nombre d'éléments qui ont été soulevés lorsque nous regardons la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. Un élément qui est assez important et qui a été soulevé par tous les différents collègues ici et surtout leurs excellences que je respecte énormément, c'est la question de formation, c'est la question de la mise à niveau d'un certain nombre de textes, la mise à niveau d'un certain nombre de personnes, et je vais aller même plus loin sur cette question de formation. Nous avons des pays dans lesquels le côté urbain est beaucoup plus développé que le côté rural. Je note pour la RDC, le taux d'alphabétisation est extrêmement discutable et challengeable. Comment arriverons-nous à implémenter un certain nombre des règles de la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine? Et ça, c'est des éléments sur lesquels nous devrons nous positionner et se dire que la formation est un élément clé. La formation sur les questions des lois, la formation sur les questions des standards des produits, je parle des produits agricoles, la formation sur les questions d'implémentation des règles, la formation sur les questions des lois fiscales, la formation sur les questions de différents ordres. Ça, c'est un élément. Un autre élément sur cette question de formation, je parle de la langue. Je ne vais pas aller sur la question culturelle, je parle de la langue. Aujourd'hui, les différentes discussions qui existent sur les questions de libre-échange continental, la plupart, elles se font en anglais. La plupart, elles se font dans une langue qui fait en sorte que les pays francophones d'Afrique, lorsqu'elles se retrouvent dans ce genre de situation, elles se disent comment on implémente nos lois qui ne sont peut-être pas encore sur les différents standards et il faut les donner dans cette langue qui est compréhensible à tout le monde. Si je reçois le Nigeria qui vient en RDC, on va faire une mission économique. Un des gros éléments, moi en tant que directeur général de l'Agence nationale pour la promotion des investissements, que j'ai avec les opérateurs économiques, que je voudrais amener au Nigeria, un des premiers éléments, un des premiers obstacles, c'est déjà la langue. Ce n'est pas les capacités des ressources que je voudrais mettre à disposition, ce n'est pas les opportunités que je veux mettre à disposition, c'est déjà premièrement la langue. Et qu'est-ce que nous faisons sur cet aspect des langues? L'autre élément, c'est le niveau extrêmement bas des côtés ruraux. Quand je regarde le fin fond de la RDC, ou quand je regarde le fin fond du Burkina Faso, le fin fond du Nigeria, le fin fond d'un certain nombre de pays, par rapport à d'autres pays qui sont développés, il y a comme un gap qui devrait normalement être rattrapé. Je suis un pro-ZLECAf. Ça, c'est un élément dans lequel il faut partir. Il nous faut avancer vers cette ZLECAf. Mais la question aujourd'hui que je me pose derrière, c'est la ZLECAf, est-ce que nous sommes en train de dire que c'est une nécessité ou est-ce que c'est une opportunité? Je vais plus loin, est-ce que c'est une nécessité ou c'est une nécessaire opportunité pour nous permettre de pouvoir avancer vers certaines règles? Et moi, je suis totalement d'accord avec ma collègue de gauche qui est en train de montrer combien le Nigeria, d'ailleurs avec le Ghana, qui ont fait un certain nombre de rôles. Moi, j'ai suivi l'économie du Ghana dernièrement, où on a eu un taux d'inflation qui a été totalement bas. Comment deux pays peuvent arriver à harmoniser leur monnaie à partir du moment où un des pays connaît une inflation extrêmement, beaucoup plus basse? Comment il va y avoir la couverture dans l'autre pays qui est en train d'avancer? Je remets malheureusement cette question sur la table parce qu'en fait, il faut qu'on la vide. En 2 heures, on ne peut pas vider une question de ZLECAf, mais il nous faut nous ajuster sur un certain nombre d'éléments. Mais je suis totalement d'accord avec vous, Monsieur Ali, que la question de la ZLECAf nécessite que nous puissions avancer vers ce que j'appelle les composantes qui nous permettront de mieux les implémenter dans nos pays. Il nous faut aller vers la ZLECAf, ça c'est un élément important. Il nous faut aller vers ce marché commun. Mais l'objectif, est-ce le marché commun? Est-ce cette libre circulation de biens seulement, sans les personnes? Les questions d'immigration ont été posées. Si je dois, moi, aller au Sénégal, je suis obligé de passer dans un pays avant d'arriver au Sénégal. Si je dois aller, par exemple, dans un autre pays en Afrique, il est important pour moi de sortir de l'Afrique et de redescendre. Donc, vous voyez un tout petit peu ces différentes problématiques que nous avons qui nous permettent de pouvoir nous reposer ces questions, mais nous nous posons ces questions en avançant. Merci beaucoup.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Kamola. I think that, you presented an opportunity where we have a challenge looking at harmonization. Harmonization of trade, harmonization of language, harmonization of labor. In relation to all of this, I think that we also have another challenge. And that challenge is how do we harmonize potential foreign investment? Or how do we harmonize potential foreigners looking at Africa? And this question is presented to Mr. Balde from Senegal. Recently, Mr. Balde, Senegal was host to two key international press events. First, when we saw President Macky Sall toasting President Biden in December at the US-Africa Summit. And most recently, we had Janet Yellen, the US Secretary of Treasury, visit Senegal when she kicked off her Africa tour. With the US emphasizing its commitment to expanding trade and investment in Africa, how can Senegal leverage this opportunity to foster closer Senegalese-African relations, to harmonize more relationships with African countries, and to encourage regional development and cooperation while balancing the influence of external players such as the US or China in Africa?
Merci beaucoup. C'est une question importante. Bien entendu, le Sénégal, comme tout le monde le sait, est la porte de l'Afrique. La pointe la plus avancée vers le plus proche de l'Europe, très proche aussi des États-Unis. Et ce qui fait que nous avons une position stratégique. Mais le Sénégal appartient aussi à des zones de libre-échange qui sont tout autour de l'Afrique. Nous avons l'UEMOA, nous avons la CEDEAO. Mais bien entendu, nous sommes aussi, pas victimes, mais nous faisons l'objet de beaucoup de convoitises des puissances étrangères, comme les États-Unis, comme vous l'avez dit, comme la Chine, comme la Russie, comme la Turquie, peut-être que vous ne l'avez pas mentionné. Donc le Sénégal est un pays qui, aujourd'hui, je l'ai appelé tantôt, très attractif, qui présente des opportunités d'investissement énormes, qui est en train de réformer son cadre législatif, qui est en train d'investir dans les infrastructures de connectivité, qui est en train aussi d'investir dans les infrastructures routières, portuaires. Et donc, ce qui fait que nous devons faire cette balance entre, bien entendu, le commerce intra-africain, qui est important et fondamental pour nous, parce que nous avons souvent les mêmes catégories de l'économie que les autres pays qui nous entourent. Donc il est important d'abord, à un niveau, le niveau qui est le nôtre, le niveau de développement qui est le nôtre, que nous puissions, en tenant compte des avantages comparatifs des uns et des autres, de pouvoir commercer et développer avec nos pays voisins, les pays avec lesquels nous partageons l'Afrique dans le cadre de la ZLECAf, parce que nos économies sont souvent complémentaires. Mais nous avons aussi besoin d'économies beaucoup plus développées pour un transfert de technologie, mais aussi pour pouvoir nous faire bénéficier de tout ce qui se fait le mieux au niveau mondial. C'est la raison pour laquelle donc, le Sénégal a des accords de libre-échange avec les États-Unis dans le cadre de l'AGOA. C'est pour ça que d'ailleurs beaucoup d'unités industrielles, qu'elles soient chinoises, qu'elles soient européennes, la plupart sont en train de s'installer dans nos zones économiques pour pouvoir bénéficier du large marché américain. Beaucoup aujourd'hui de produits surtout en vestimentaire, sont produits au Sénégal par des entreprises chinoises et exportés aux États-Unis. Donc nous ne fermons pas cette relation avec les États-Unis ni avec l'Union européenne, avec laquelle aussi nous avons des accords de liberté. De plus en plus, nous avons les Chinois qui arrivent, de plus en plus nous avons les Russes, nous avons aussi, bien entendu, les Turcs, sans oublier les Indiens. Mais notre orientation fondamentale pour les années qui viennent, c'est de faire de telle sorte que nous puissions développer le commerce intra-africain, de développer le commerce avec nos voisins dans le cadre de l'UEMOA, avec lesquels nous partageons la même langue. Peut-être qu'il n'y a pas cette barrière que tantôt mon collègue de la RDC disait. Avec les 8 pays de l'UEMOA, nous parlons la même langue. Et puis après, nous l'élargissons au sein de la CEDEAO, que nous partageons avec le Nigeria. Et puis, bien entendu, avec la ZLECAf. Nous sommes en train de travailler dans le cadre des agences de promotion aussi africaines. Donc, je salue le président ici, dans l'harmonisation de nos textes, mais aussi d'échanges d'expériences. Et nous pensons qu'aussi, de plus en plus, il faut encourager la création de clubs d'investisseurs, parce qu'il faut que nos économies qu'elles ne soient pas concurrentielles. Ce qui se fait le mieux en Côte d'Ivoire ne soit pas reproduit au Sénégal, mais essayer de tirer ce qui est le mieux, ce qui est en train d'être fait au Côte d'Ivoire, nous faisons mieux dans un autre secteur. Par exemple, dans l'automobile, si la Côte d'Ivoire, nous pensons que la Côte d'Ivoire, son industrie automobile peut fournir l'ensemble des pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, nous devons peut-être nous orienter vers un autre secteur de façon à ce que nos deux industries soient complémentaires et non concurrentielles. Parce que nous avons encore des tailles beaucoup plus petites et qui ne peuvent pas concurrencer les grandes industries des pays développés. Donc nous considérons que le Sénégal est foncièrement ancré dans la ZLECAf, mais il est aussi ouvert à commercer avec le reste du monde, avec les États-Unis, comme vous l'avez dit, mais aussi avec la Chine, la Russie, la Turquie et puis l'Inde.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I wanted to ask the panelists, do you have any other comments before we present it to the audience, to ask questions? Because, yes.
Ali, I have another meeting, so
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
All right, not a problem. So maybe if you could keep it very short.
I have a problem in keeping my comments short, but I will say. So the point about the question that you've asked to the Honorable Delegate of Senegal is an important one. Africa is going to get, hopefully, the G20 seat, another G20 seat. And that seat will be, so the chair of the African Union will represent Africa and with the support of the chairperson of the African Union Commission. How we use that seat is very, very important. Because let's not be naive. You made reference to the visits of these dignitaries on the continent. This is part of the geostrategic games that are, of course, informing the world of today, the shifts in global powers, and the race, in this particular case, to secure the critical minerals that inform the transitions toward net zero. We need to strengthen our bargaining power. And with a view to utilizing that G20 seat for the benefit of the continent. And therefore, understanding exactly what is at stake, understanding what is our strength, and in engaging, therefore, with the rest of the world accordingly, should be part of our game plan. Because otherwise, as I said earlier, what is currently made Africa the place where everyone is trying to position itself might not last forever. So we have a couple of opportunities here. The G20 seat is one of them. Of course, we have the SDG summit coming in September, which we are going to, forgive me for utilizing a little bit of the UN language here. So this is where we are going to discuss whether we can rescue or not the SDGs. The SDGs in general are off track. Africa is part of the solutions towards achieving some of the goals for the SDGs, including especially climate action. So we can utilize that asset to be able to bargain for more space, policy space, fiscal space. The conversation on the reform of global financial architecture that I made earlier are part of that game moving forward. Then we have the Summit for the Future next year. This is really about what is going to be the world of tomorrow. We need, as an Africa, to be able to look at our demographics. We will be 2.5 billion people by 2050. If we do not invest in human capital development, then the way forward may be a little bit more complex than it is today. So this is a couple of the things that we really need to be introduced in our conversation. The Deputy Secretary General has started last year what she calls the Global Africa Business Initiative. And the slogan was Unstoppable Africa. I think we need to interrogate that and to make sure that indeed we are at the center of all of these global shifts, and we can get the most out of this. So, and this will require leadership. That's the other element of us trying to develop this ecosystem. Leadership beyond governments, leadership in civil society organizations, leadership in the business community, the captains of industry and beyond, and other groups like chambers of commerce and so on and so forth. The opportunity is there, but it will not last forever. That's what I was trying to convey to this platform. Thank you.
All right, thank you, and thank you everyone. In the interest of time, I believe we have to end this right now. All right, so we appreciate your time being with us, and we appreciate the panelists for their insight and time to share their thoughts on the AfCFTA and investing in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,